The Silent Woman, Part 1. By Leopold Compert. The uproarious merriment of a wedding feast burst forth into the night from a brilliantly lighted house in the narrow street. It was one of those nights touched with the warmth of spring, but dark and full of soft mist. Most fitting it was for a celebration of the union of two yearning hearts to share the same lot, a lot that may possibly dawn in sunny brightness, but also become clouded and sullen, for a long, long time. But how merry and joyous they were over there, those people of the happy olden times. They, like us, had their troubles and trials, and when misfortune visited them it came not to them with soft cushions and tender pressures of the hand. Rough and hard, with clenched fist, it laid hold upon them. But when they gave vent to their happy feelings and sought to enjoy themselves, they were like swimmers in cooling waters. They struck out into the stream with freshness and courage, suffered themselves to be borne along by the current whithersoever it took its course. This was the cause of such a jubilee, such a thoughtlessly noisy outburst of all kinds of soul-possessing gaiety from this house of nuptials. And if I had known, the bride's father, the rich Reuben Klattner, had just said, that it would take the last gulden in my pocket, then out it would have come. In fact, it did appear as if the last groschen had really taken flight, and was fluttering about in the form of platters heaped up with geese and pastry tarts. Since 2 o'clock, that is, since the marriage ceremony had been performed out in the open street, until nearly midnight, the wedding feast had been progressing, and even yet the sarvers, or waiters, were hurrying from room to room. It was as if a twofold blessing had descended upon all this abundance of food and drink, for, in the first place, they did not seem to diminish, secondly, they ever found a new place for disposal. To be sure, this appetite was sharpened by the presence of a little dwarf-like, unimportant-looking man. He was esteemed, however, none the less highly by every one. They had specially written to engage the celebrated Leb Nar, of Prague. And when was ever a mood so out of sorts, a heart so embittered as not to thaw out and laugh if Leb Nar played one of his pranks? Ah, thou art now dead, good fool. Thy lips, once always ready with a witty reply, are closed. Thy mouth, then never still, now speaks no more. But when the hearty peals of laughter once rang forth at thy command, intercessors, as it were, in thy behalf before the very throne of God, thou hadst nothing to fear. And the joy of that other world was thine, that joy that has ever belonged to the most pious of country rabbis. In the meantime the young people had assembled in one of the rooms to dance. It was strange how the sound of violins and trumpets accorded with the drolleries of the wit from Prague. In one part the outbursts of merriment were so boisterous that the very candles on the little table seemed to flicker with terror, in another an ordinary conversation was in progress, which now and then only ran over into a loud tittering, when some old lady slipped into the circle and tried her skill at a redowa, then altogether unknown to the young people. In the very midst of the tangle of dancers was to be seen the bride in a heavy silk wedding gown. The point of her golden hood hung far down over her face. She danced continuously. She danced with every one that asked her. Had one, however, observed the actions of the young woman, they would certainly have seemed to him hurried, agitated, almost wild. She looked no one in the eye, not even her own bridegroom. He stood for the most part in the doorway, and evidently took more pleasure in the witticisms of the fool than in the dance or the lady dancers. But who ever thought for a moment why the young woman's hand burned, why her breath was so hot when one came near to her lips? Who should have noticed so strange a thing? A low whispering already passed through the company, a stealthy smile stole across many a lip. A bevy of ladies was seen to enter the room suddenly. The music dashed off into one of its loudest pieces, and, as if by enchantment, the newly made bride disappeared behind the ladies. The bridegroom, with his stupid, smiling mien, was still left standing on the threshold. But it was not long before he too vanished. One could hardly say how it happened. But people understand such skillful movements by experience, and will continue to understand them as long as there are brides and grooms in the world. This disappearance of the chief personages, little as it seemed to be noticed, gave, however, the signal for general leave-taking. The dancing became drowsy, it stopped all at once, as if by appointment. That noisy confusion now began which always attends so merry a wedding party. Half-drunken voices could be heard still intermingled with a last, hearty laugh over a joke of the fool from Prague echoing across the table. Here and there someone, not quite sure of his balance, was fumbling for the arm of his chair or the edge of the table. This resulted in his overturning a dish that had been forgotten, or in spilling a beer glass. While this, in turn, set up a new hubbub, someone else, in his eagerness to betake himself from the scene, fell flat into the very debris. But all this tumult was really hushed the moment they all pressed to the door, for at that very instant shrieks, cries of pain, were heard issuing from the entrance below. In an instant the entire outpouring crowd with all possible force pushed back into the room, but it was a long time before the stream was pressed back again. Meanwhile, painful cries were again heard from below, so painful, indeed, that they restored even the most drunken to a state of consciousness. By the living God, they cried to each other, what is the matter down there? Is the house on fire? She is gone. She is gone, shrieked a woman's voice from the entry below. Who? Who? Groaned the wedding guests, seized, as it were, with an icy horror. Gone. Gone, cried the woman from the entry, and hurrying up the stairs came Selda Kladner, the mother of the bride, pale as death, her eyes dilated with most awful fright, convulsively grasping a candle in her hand. For God's sake, what has happened, was heard on every side of her. The sight of so many people about her, and the confusion of voices, seemed to release the poor woman from a kind of stupor. She glanced shyly about her then, as if overcome with a sense of shame stronger than her terror, and said, in a suppressed tone, "Nothing, nothing, good people. In God's name, I ask, what was there to happen?" Dissimulation, however, was too evident to suffice to deceive them. "Why, then, did you shriek so, Selda?" called out one of the guests to her, "if nothing happened?" "Yes, she has gone," Selda now moaned in heart-rending tones, "and she has certainly done herself some harm." The cause of this strange scene was now first discovered. The bride has disappeared from the wedding feast. Soon after that she had vanished in such a mysterious way, the bridegroom went below to the dimly lighted room to find her, but in vain. At first thought this seemed to him to be a sort of bashful jest, but not finding her here, a mysterious foreboding seized him. He called to the mother of the bride. "Woe to me! This woman has gone." Presently this party, that had so admirably controlled itself, was again thrown into commotion. There was nothing to do, was said on all sides, but to ransack every nook and corner. Remarkable instances of such disappearances of brides had been known. Evil spirits were wont to lurk about such nights and to inflict mankind with all sorts of sorceries. Strange as this explanation may seem, there were many who believed it at this very moment, and, most of all, Selda Kladner herself. But it was only for a moment, for she at once exclaimed, "No, no, my good people, she is gone, I know she is gone." Now for the first time many of them, especially the mothers, felt particularly uneasy, and anxiously called their daughters to them. Only a few showed courage, and urged that they must search and search, even if they had to turn aside the river Iser 100 times. They urgently pressed on, called for torches and lanterns, and started forth. The cowardly ran after them up and down the stairs. Before anyone perceived it the room was entirely forsaken. Reuben Kladner stood in the hall entry below, and let the people hurry past him without exchanging a word with any. Bitter disappointment and fear had almost crazed him. One of the last to stay in the room above with Selda was, strange to say, Leb Nar, of Prague. After all had departed, he approached the miserable mother, and, in a tone least becoming his general manner, inquired, "Tell me, now, Mrs. Selda, did she not wish to have him?" "Whom? Whom? Cried Zelda, with renewed alarm, when she found herself alone with the fool. I mean, said Leb, in a most sympathetic manner, approaching still nearer to Zelda, that maybe you had to make your daughter marry him. Make? And have we, then, made her, moaned Zelda, staring at the fool with a look of uncertainty. Then nobody needs to search for her, replied the fool, with a sympathetic laugh, at the same time retreating. It's better to leave her where she is. Without saying thanks or good night, he was gone. Meanwhile the cause of all this disturbance had arrived at the end of her flight. Close by the synagogue was situated the house of the rabbi. It was built in an angle of a very narrow street, set in a framework of tall shade trees. Even by daylight it was dismal enough. At night it was almost impossible for a timid person to approach it, for people declared that the low supplications of the dead could be heard in the dingy house of God when at night they took the rolls of the law from the ark to summon their members by name. Through this retired street passed, or rather ran, at this hour a shy form. Arriving at the dwelling of the rabbi, she glanced backward to see whether anyone was following her. But all was silent and gloomy enough about her. A pale light issued from one of the windows of the synagogue. It came from the eternal lamp, hanging in front of the Ark of the Covenant. But at this moment it seemed to her as if a supernatural eye was gazing upon her. Thoroughly affrighted, she seized the little iron knocker of the door and struck it gently. But the throb of her beating heart was even louder, more violent, than this blow. After a pause, footsteps were heard passing slowly along the hallway. The rabbi had not occupied this lonely house a long time. His predecessor, almost a centenarian in years, had been laid to rest a few months before. The new rabbi had been called, from a distant part of the country. He was unmarried, and in the prime of life. No one had known him before his coming. But his personal nobility and the profundity of his scholarship made up for his deficiency in years. An aged mother had accompanied him from their distant home, and she took the place of wife and child. "Who is there?" asked the rabbi, who had been busy at his desk even at this late hour and thus had not missed hearing the knocker. "It is I," the figure without responded, almost inaudibly. "Speak louder, if you wish me to hear you," replied the rabbi. "It is I, Reuben Klattner's daughter," she repeated. The name seemed to sound strange to the rabbi. He as yet knew too few of his congregation to understand that this very day he performed the marriage ceremony of the person who had just repeated her name. Therefore he called out, after a moment's pause, "What do you wish so late at night?" "Open the door, Rabbi," she answered, pleadingly, "or I shall die at once." The bolt was pushed back. Something gleaming, rustling, glided past the rabbi into the dusky hall. The light of the candle in his hand was not sufficient to allow him to descry it. Before he had time to address her, she had vanished past him and had disappeared through the open door into the room. Shaking his head, the rabbi again bolted the door. On re-entering the room he saw a woman's form sitting in the chair which he usually occupied. She had her back turned to him. Her head was bent low over her breast. Her golden wedding hood, with its shading lace, was pulled down over her forehead. Courageous and pious as the rabbi was, he could not rid himself of a feeling of terror. "Who are you?" he demanded, in a loud tone, as if its sound alone would banish the presence of this being that seemed to him at this moment to be the production of all the enchantments of evil spirits. She raised herself, and cried in a voice that seemed to come from the agony of a human being. "Do you not know me, whom you married a few hours since under the chup, marriage canopy, to a husband?" On hearing this familiar voice the rabbi stood speechless. He gazed at the young woman. Now, indeed, he must regard her as one bereft of reason, rather than as a spectre. "Well, if you are she," he stammered out, after a pause, for it was with difficulty that he found words to answer, "why are you here and not in the place where you belong?" "I know no other place to which I belong more than here where I now am," she answered, severely. These words puzzled the rabbi still more. Is it really an insane woman before him? He must have thought so, for he now addressed her in a gentle tone of voice, as we do those suffering from this kind of sickness, in order not to excite her, and said, "The place where you belong, my daughter, is in the house of your parents, and, since you have today been made a wife, your place is in your husband's house." The young woman muttered something which failed to reach the rabbi's ear. Yet he only continued to think that he saw before him some poor unfortunate whose mind was deranged. After a pause, he added, in a still gentler tone, "What is your name, then, my child?" "God, God," she moaned, in the greatest anguish, "he does not even yet know my name." "How should I know you?" he continued, apologetically, "for I am a stranger in this place." This tender remark seemed to have produced the desired effect upon her excited mind. "My name is Vale," she said, quietly, after a pause. The rabbi quickly perceived that he had adopted the right tone towards his mysterious guest. "Vale," he said, approaching nearer her, "what do you wish of me?" "Rabbi, I have a great sin resting heavily upon my heart," she replied despondently. "I do not know what to do." "What can you have done?" inquired the rabbi, with a tender look, "that cannot be discussed at any other time than just now? Will you let me advise you, Vale?" "No, no," she cried again, violently, "I will not be advised. I know what oppresses me. Yes, I can grasp it by the hand, it lies so near before me. Is that what you call to be advised?" "Very well," returned the rabbi, seeing that this was the very way to get the young woman to talk, "very well, I say, you are not imagining anything. I believe that you have greatly sinned. Have you come here then to confess this sin? Do your parents or your husband know anything about it?" "Who is my husband?" she interrupted him, impetuously. Thoughts welled up in the rabbi's heart like a tumultuous sea in which opposing conjectures cross and recross each other's course. Should he speak with her as with an ordinary sinner? "Were you, perhaps, forced to be married?" he inquired, as quietly as possible, after a pause. A suppressed sob, a strong inward struggle, manifesting itself in the whole trembling body, was the only answer to this question. "Tell me, my child," said the rabbi, encouragingly. In such tones as the rabbi had never before heard, so strange, so surpassing any human sounds, the young woman began. "Yes, Rabbi, I will speak, even though I know that I shall never go from this place alive, which would be the very best thing for me. No, Rabbi, I was not forced to be married. My parents have never once said to me, 'You must,' but my own will, my own desire, rather, has always been supreme. My husband is the son of a rich man in the community. To enter his family was to be made the first lady in the gas, to sit buried in gold and silver. And that very thing, nothing else, was what infatuated me with him. It was for that I forced myself, my heart and will, to be married to him, hard as it was for me. But in my innermost heart I detested him. The more he loved me, the more I hated him. But the gold and silver had an influence over me. More and more they cried to me, 'You will be the first lady in the gas.'" "Continue," said the rabbi, when she ceased, almost exhausted by these words. "What more shall I tell you, Rabbi?" she began again. "I was never a liar, when a child, or older, and yet during my whole engagement it has seemed to me as if a big, gigantic lie had followed me step by step. I have seen it on every side of me. But today, when I stood under the chup, Rabbi, and he took the ring from his finger and put it on mine, and when I had to dance at my own wedding with him, whom I now recognized, now for the first time, as the lie, and, when they led me away,